wonderful webinar about HOAs. We are really happy to have our panelists here who are joining us. We have Michelle Bailog from Christie's International Realty. We have Anthony Koutsos with Keller Williams and Nicholas Bowers with Skyline Property Management. We are going to be taking you through this presentation today. Our goal is to give agents who both work with buyers and sellers great information they can use to best represent their clients as they're going through the punches of working with HOAs. So many roadblocks, hurdles, curveballs come up in the process. We always think that we are doing a good job to anticipate what's coming our way. And, inevitably there are going to be things that come up that maybe we don't anticipate because every HOA is different, every seller is different, every buyer is different. So we have considerations with lending, with building, with insurance, and just people, right? So we're going to go through this today, and if you have questions, please use the chat function to put in your or the Q&A to put in your questions, and we can kind of take them as we go through, and then we'll allot some time at the end to capture any questions that maybe we didn't get to. This is being recorded, so you'll be able to find this on the SFAR video library, and we'll put that link also in the chat so that people can bookmark that. But without further ado, why don't we have our panelists just kind of say hello and answer maybe just a quick question. So introduce yourselves, and then what is one takeaway that you are hoping that our attendees can take with them at the end of this presentation? And what is maybe a fresh perspective you have on collaborating with HOAs that actually has been successful for you in the process? Why don't we start with you, Michelle?
Hi, everybody. Good morning. I'm Michelle Bailog with Christie's International Real Estate. I've been licensed since 2002. When I got my license, I joined TRI Coldwell Banker. I was like, I want to sell Pacific Heights. So I went and joined the best Pacific Heights office. And of course, many of those grand dames that were there forever had been doing it forever, but they would say to me, oh, my client's grandson wants to buy one of those little lofts down in South Beach. Would you help him? So that's kind of how I started. I started selling condos. I'm still selling them now. And I think my biggest takeaway is tour. I feel like a lot of agents don't tour even the buildings that they know. So many things have changed. A lot of buildings have renovated, but also time's always of the essence. Don't wait to order the condo cert and review it because it's often wrong the first time you get it. Ask questions, send it to your clients. And condos are a great source of business because people don't stay in them forever. They usually trade up. So that's my biggest tidbit. That was the success of Climb Real Estate when I was there, is a lot of those people that we worked with originally in condos moved on to bigger things.
Great. Well, thank you, Michelle. Nicholas, how about you?
Yeah, thanks for having me. So I'm Nicholas. I own Skyline Property Management. We do multifamily rentals and HOA management. Smaller build. We can definitely do. We have some very large ones, but we're mostly focused on smaller. A lot of HOAs that have never had management. We'll walk them through and get them going, and then a lot of multifamily rentals. I would say. I can only speak to us. I can't speak for the management companies, but obviously get the docs early. And by that, I mean like 2 months prior to someone's thinking about selling. I think you guys are hearing from people like considering what to do in 2 months, maybe rent it, maybe sell it. At that point, I would start the process. And even if it's the owner asking for some documents from the board, for a good management company, if it's not in the docs, then we don't have the answer either. So it's not a delay on us trying to answer stuff for you. Every question that comes to us goes to the board, gets approval, comes back. So it takes 3 times as long for everything that comes through. So the other thing is the HOA company has we'll get into this later, but we only have obligation to the owner, but we can help anybody that the owner says. But it's definitely a, I think a lot of management companies have the right to say, oh, you have to go to the owner as a way to delay you if it's becoming irritating. And so I think we all want to avoid that. And it starts from the very beginning of being educated, coming in and not just having us answer stuff that we've already given. Does that make sense? It's so I guess I'll just go back. It's if it's not in the docs, we don't have it, but make sure you read the docs before you come back to us with something. That's a lot of circles of stuff, but we'll go through it. I'll try to explain better.
Sound advice. Great. And Anthony.
My name's Anthony Koutsos. I'm with Keller Williams. And like Michelle, I started in 2002. And what I ended up doing were open houses at TICs. And I just kind of fell into that thing. And now I've become effectively the king of TICs, sort of like the muffler king, the king of what nobody wants to be the king of. But I have sold 22 TICs in the last 6 months, and I set up the HOA for most of those. Some of them, the bigger ones, require a Department of Real Estate public report, and they will set the budget and the reserve study, and you have to follow that. You have to use that budget, and you have to use that HOA payment set by the DRE. But in the smaller ones, below 5 units, 4 units or less, I set everything up when I work with developers and present a 4 unit TIC. And the one takeaway that I would like to mention is just something that sort of, I don't know, a little pet peeve of mine. You see agents putting things out there and saying there are no HOA dues. There are no HOA dues. Like that's some sort of big selling point. They're so afraid to set an HOA payment, and that's completely false. There's no such thing as no HOA dues. Especially today, insurance has skyrocketed. I mean, what used to be $3,000 is now $10,000 for building insurance. So when somebody says there are no HOA dues, they're just saying we're afraid to set a number. And I prefer to set a decent number. For example, a little 3 unit I'm selling right now on Market Street, I made it 450. Or maybe I'll make it 650 in a bigger one, a bigger building with fewer units or something. And the market doesn't have a problem with that. The buyers don't, and as a buyer's agent, don't be afraid to take your buyer and show them something that has a 450, 500, 600, $700 a month HOA. The buyers are not running away from that. That's a myth. Don't be afraid of having an accurate HOA payment that covers insurance, water, garbage, bookkeeping. You should always set up professional bookkeeping in a TIC. And then you want to have some money set aside for reserves. So that's my big pet peeve regarding HOAs is when agents become obsessed with trying to promote that there are no HOA dues, or it's $100 a month or something ridiculous like that, which is not accurate. It's false.
All that glitters is not gold, right?
Right. And don't be afraid of, having a reasonable HOA payment. It's not, you're going to sell it, if you're a listing agent and you have the option to set up the HOA and establish what that payment is. Developers don't know what to do. Oh, and by the way, I make the developer pay that $450 on the day that I sell the first unit. They pay that every month, starting on day one. And I'm not getting pushback from developers or buyers or, sellers. So don't be afraid of HOA dues. You need them. You rather have something that's established and real than something falsely low because you think that that's what you need to sell your listing. Or, as a buyer's agent, oh yeah, let's go for that one because it's got really low HOA dues.
Great.
I don't think
Anthony, I tell my clients the same thing. I'm like, there's no free lunch. When you own a house, you don't have a formal dues payment, but what does it cost to have your water, your garbage, your maintenance? You should be painting, repairing, sealing the property at all times. And it is frustrating when people advertise low dues as a great thing because it's actually really not. The longer you defer something, the more expensive it is to do in the end.
Then all of a sudden you're hit with a $20,000 special
Right.
assessment or something. Oh, great! I could have been paying $100 a month for the last 5 years, and now all of a sudden I need to come up with $20,000 or $15,000 or something. To me, that's more painful than having a reasonable HOA payment.
Yeah.
Well, and then when they go to sell, a savvy buyer is going to see that situation and shake their head, right? That's a situation that no buyer really wants to step into with eyes wide open.
Right. It kind of looks ghetto when the HOA is too low. You're like, they have no money and the place is not fixed up, and oh boy, it's $200 a month. Great. But, barely even pays the water and garbage.
There's a lot in the smaller ones, there's a lot where they will pay the minimum and then, oh, we just do special assessments every time there's a project. And when
Every
we
few
take
months.
when we take over a property like that, we get them into reserves, funding and such. But that's all good until you hit a COVID or you hit a recession or you hit the one person's trying to sell and they can't, or one renter moves out and there's no income for that owner. I'm not a big fan of that. It just takes one to make it all fall down.
Right.
So, this slide here, I think we're kind of speaking to some of these things. The timing is really important, and that there's hopefully either, and the listing agent is at the helm working with the developer to help set that budget and get some money rolling in. Documents are flowing quickly and early. And that there's somebody there, like an agent, to contextualize what this process is going to look like so that it's not scary, right, for both buyers and sellers. So, okay, next slide. Okay, so the spectrum of HOA. Next slide. Great. So maybe, since we have, Anthony, you just kind of touched on this, and Nicholas, you've also touched on it. Maybe we could just kind of give a very quick overview for people who are not that familiar, what that range is that we see in the city between, a totally informal HOA, okay, if we need a new roof, we'll just split it, right? There's that, all the way to a large project with a big board and a big HOA and a property management company and lots of rules and house rules and everything else, and $800 HOA packages to order. Can we speak a little bit about this and maybe just kind of give people a quick nugget that they maybe haven't thought of when it comes to these three different situations?
I just got an email from Rosemary McGinnis, who sets up condos, and I wanted to know what is the difference between a TIC with a couple of owners and an HOA. Like, what is an HOA? And her answer was, you own a condo, you are a member of the HOA, and you collectively, with the other owners, have obligations under the Davis-Sterling Act. Condos are HOAs simply because the owners own a condominium. California law allows HOA to be incorporated or unincorporated. California law addresses the obligations of associations, meaning the board, the owners collectively, and the owners. Throughout California Civil Code Davis-Sterling Act, there are references to associations. There is no law governing TICs, but TICs of 5 or more units need DRE approval in order to sell, and the DRE approval requires the TIC to include most of the obligations of condo HOAs. 2 to 4 unit TICs mirror the obligations of condo HOAs. Are 2 to 4 TICs, meaning she writes the TIC agreement for those smaller ones. So that's just what are these things? That was just, trying to understand what exactly is an HOA. And there are laws in California, and, you're a part of the association purely simply by owning a condominium. And in condominiums, the CC&Rs are recorded on title. In a TIC, they are not. It's just the TIC agreement, but it's basically the same thing. There's not really any difference.
The biggest thing we saw is that the HOAs are governed by Davis Sterling. The TICs are not.
They try to mimic
they do, but there's no thing. And I don't know if everyone on knows about Davis Sterling. You don't have to know it all, but you should be kind of familiar with it. I personally, as managers, we like Davis Sterling because it basically tells us what needs to be done anyhow. It actually makes a lot of sense. It's a lot of hassle, but it does guide how we govern and the best protection for buildings when things don't go well. Um, the problem with it is there's no outside enforcement. It's only internal reporting. And so you might have a 6 unit building, like we have one up on Green, that they think they're doing everything right, but they don't know what they're missing out on. And no one's complaining, but you will get someone that comes in that buys into it or wants to sell out that starts to see the things that should have been done, and then you have some trouble. And that's kind of where the difference between no management and self-managed versus a professional management is they just don't know what they don't know that will pop up in the sale.
And when I set up
But,
these smaller ones, I always set up Homeworks bookkeeping, and
yeah,
I like
homeworks is good.
really I set up the the dues. Like let's say it's a 4 unit TIC, I'll say okay, the dues are. I first look at the insurance. How much is that? And water, garbage, and all that, and then something for reserves and bookkeeping, and then I get an EIN number from the IRS, which is really easy to do. It takes 2 seconds,
Yeah.
and that way they can set up a bank account in the name of the TIC. Let's see, 456 Main Street TIC, for example, and you have that EIN number, which is replacement for a social security number, so that you can open up a bank account in the name of the HOA. And that goes to kind of insurance as well. You want to try to get your insurance as a more like a condo building insurance, so that it can just be 456 Main Street TIC is insured, and that way you can put buyers in and out and in and out without always having to worry about getting people's names on and off of the insurance. But
Michelle, would you ever do something like that in a condo project that was totally informal? Would you ever engage in that the way Anthony just described setting up a TIC?
I would not. If it's an established, if it's a small, like 2 to 4 unit building, I would not. But what I do is ask my client who the HOA president is, or who is actually acting. Do they have a professional manager? If they have a professional manager, I reach out to the professional manager to get the condo financial disclosure statement filled out, and then all the documents that they have in advance, so I can see what we're dealing with. And when it's if it's self-managed, then you have to be a little bit more on top of it, because it's not a paid position. And I always tell my buyers, like, look, small buildings are great, but they're not. If they don't have a manager, guess what? You just got a second job. You're gonna have to be involved in order to really make sure that the building is being taken care of. And so I would try to do it really early in advance. And I do the same thing with the large condo buildings, because the fees that owners have to pay in order to get the documents are really expensive. And very often the turnaround times is 10 days. And if you rush, then it costs a lot more money. And it's tricky because the condo market in San Francisco, especially in high-rise communities, has been so terrible the last couple of years since COVID, that our poor owners are paying for these condo certs and all these HOA documents, and then you're on the market for a year and a half. What do you do? And so, but there's a couple things that I do. I try to order it really, really as soon as we get the listing. Very often they say, oh, I can go on my portal and I can do it myself. And I say, you can, but you really want to put the onus on the HOA management company. In the event that something is missed, you may not think that something's important. The frustrating thing with that is very often they don't even have all the documents, especially if they have switched managers. For instance, something that commonly comes up is prior SB 800 claims. Even if they're 20 years old, you're still supposed to provide the settlement letter. Doesn't matter how long it is. There's been lots of, legal cases about it. Even if the work has been settled, it still has to be disclosed to prospective buyers, or should be anyway. But I try to get the full HOA management packet in advance without the client having to pay a rush. And one of the first things I do is I actually read the condo cert. Then that gives you a basis to ask questions to your client, like, is there any upcoming special assessments? and so forth that we may have to navigate with the lender. Is there any active construction going on at the building? I'll ask the client, obviously we're walking through the property. One of the other things I do is I look at the date of the insurance policy and when the renewal is, because the buyer's lender is going to need insurance. And that is just completely out of our control. If I haven't done business in a building, I might even send the policy to one of my favorite condo lenders and say, hey, is there anything on here that you think is going to be problematic so I can try to navigate it now? Um, and often on these condo certs, now our condo financial disclosure statement even asks, what do the dues cover? And I recently had a listing where there was a gas fireplace and they said that the HOA included gas. And I was like, really? Because that's the source of heat in the unit. So I kicked it back to the HOA because someone who filled it out incorrectly. Another thing I do right away is I look at the minutes that they've given me. I read them, of course, but I look at the dates. If I order a package in January of 2026 and the last set of minutes I have is from August, well, then we're going to ask the management company with the seller on the email, hey, have there been any other meetings? Because they talk about in August, there's going to be a September meeting. Where are the minutes? Small buildings, it's very frequent that we don't have minutes. It's very informal. And in that case, I might ask my client for just important email correspondence between all the owners because guess what? Like when the buyer buys, they are these people's neighbors and they're going to be party to all these conversations. So, I really try to get all the documents in advance and look at them and just ask questions, just like I would if I was representing the buyer, right? Just making sure that everything is there. And that often helps us, um, get in front of problems that we might have while we're in escrow. And it's a
And
great way for you to interact with the management company too. I mean, I can't tell you sometimes in high-rise buildings, if the owner walks down to the office and says, we're thinking about selling our place, I usually give them three names. And very often I'm on the list because I'm asking really good questions.
And SFAR does have that notice of unavailable HOA documents, which I think is also really important to put in that package because it gives, you know, buyers an idea of what's available, what's not, and then it gives them an opportunity to ask questions, right?
Another thing too is staying on top of the minutes. Like if you have a listing for 9 months, I kind of set an alert in my calendar that every month I'm reaching out to the HOA with my client saying, hey, are there any new minutes that said there was going to be a meeting? And it's hard to do that. And then once we get into contract, I'm telling my client, look, your obligation to disclose does not stop until you close. So if there's an announcement that goes out on the building link, or you get something, or you hear something, or you get a set of minutes or something, you have to give them to us until we close. It states it in the SFAR contract that you will do that. So I think it's really important to make sure clients understand that, you don't want anything coming back. I always say to my sellers, I want happy people all the way around. I represent you, but I want everybody happy in the transaction.
Great. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. So we've talked about some of this. Um, so these are some documents that, obviously we would like to see in the package. You know, agents often, and Michelle, you're kind of speaking to this. We would love to hear from you and the others about what do people commonly miss? What are some things that people don't read thoroughly? That's buyer agents and listing agents. Who can comment briefly on this one?
I usually read the CCNRs and the house rules to see do they match because there's been sometimes changes in weight restrictions for animals and CCNRs say one thing and the house rules say something else. So that's something that, obviously the CCNRs are recorded against the property, but an HOA may not have amended their CCNRs, but perhaps they're following a set of house rules. And maybe if that's the case, getting in writing from the manager and the seller, which one is the HOA actually enforcing, right? Because legally they're supposed to enforce what's in the CCNRs, but a lot of HOAs don't actually amend their documents because it requires a certain percentage of a vote. For instance, there's an HOA building that I've done a lot of business with over the years where many, many, many years ago, they amended their CCNRs to say you had to occupy your unit for 1 year before you could rent it. Well, then in 2020, the state of California said, okay, HOAs, you can't restrict homeowners associations like that. But they've chosen not to amend the CCNRs yet, but they disclose that they can't enforce it, right? So there's an email that I have from the management company that says, yes, it's in there. We recognize it's there. We have not amended our CCNRs, but we want people to know that this will not be enforced.
Yeah, and that comes up, especially with the smaller, 6 unit buildings where they've kind of all formally agreed on house rules in a meeting, and they think that if they vote on, and they don't go through the formal process, an owner, there's no way to enforce it when you're rotating the owners in the building. We there's a lot of things that even like charging a move-in fee, or I think one of them, the damage to water leaks that were caused by owners is goes on to the association, not the individual owner, which is a big one. And so, but when we tell them the process, you have to change your CCNRs for this, and it's you can't get the votes, you can't get the meeting. So they just all agree to it until a new owner doesn't have to abide, and that's when the things come up. But it's really hard to find those. If you're doing your nightly reading of the minutes and the CCNRs, and if you can stay awake after page 3 of doing that, you can find it. But it doesn't come out. The other thing I want to say on disclosure is we only have obligation to disclose to the owner. And everyone's afraid of causing liability, right? And being the one that revealed something, because we only have to go to the owner. We work for the HOA. And so a lot of stuff that realtors are asking us to disclose, we won't unless the HOA approves it, which often they don't, and they don't have to on a lot of these documents legally. But we will give everything to the owner, and it's up to them to disclose it. And so following that route and that patience helps a lot.
Okay.
One thing I can say about the TIC part of it, I like what Michelle's saying about really doing all that work up front. A lot of times we don't do that. You get a listing in an existing TIC, and one thing that comes up when the buyer's getting a loan and the bank looks at the TIC agreement, they say, well, where are all the signatures on this TIC agreement? And Andy Serkin developed a thing called an assumption and release. So you no longer get each owner, and every time there's a new owner, to sign the whole TIC agreement. They act more like CCNRs. They just exist there. And then there's a document that adds a person to the TIC agreement and removes the previous person from the obligations of the TIC agreement. So that's something that you might want to work on. Or if you're a buyer's agent and you get into contract in an existing TIC, you might say, hey, listen, let's make sure that we've got all the signatures on that TIC agreement, and or the assumption and release. And then insurance, again, just like Michelle mentioned, and this is a great thing to do, get that on day one. If you're the buyer's agent, or if you're a really good listing agent, you could actually do what she suggested and run that by a couple of the lenders and say, what do you think? Does this pass your underwriting approval? Because insurance is changing so much right now, and it's really becoming a big, big issue. So it's something to get going. Those two items in a TIC are something to get going on day one.
Anthony, who's paying for the assumption and releases now? Is because I know that there's a TIC addendum to the San Francisco purchase agreement, but who typically is paying for the assumption and release? Is it the buyer or is it the seller?
The assumption and release is a document, an instrument that is included in the TIC agreement when Andy Serkin writes the TIC agreement. So it's like a blank page that is included. And if you're working with a really good escrow officer who does a lot of TICs, they'll just handle that for you. You don't even have to touch it. It will be a part of the closing package, and it's notarized, and the buyer and the seller will both sign it. But if you're somehow in an escrow where the escrow officer is saying, I have nothing to do with that, then you could do it yourself. It's not that hard. It's just filling in the name and the percentage and price and things like that. And of course, there's also the exhibit where you list the owners and which unit they own and parking and what they paid. That has to be redone each time there's a sale. So those two documents need to be done, but that's something anybody can do. You don't have to pay for it, but if nobody wants to do it, if the listing agent doesn't want to do it and the escrow officer doesn't want to do it, then you could, yeah, hire, one of the attorneys like Rosemary McGinnis or Andy Serkin or Lisa Paul to do it. And, it's hard to say who pays for that. I guess it's sort of up in the air, but, as a buyer's agent, I would probably just go ahead and, pay for it, as have the buyer pay for it,
Yeah.
because the
What I,
buyer's coming into it and, assuming their position, and they want all that paperwork to be perfect and present that to the lender, but that has to be done by the close of escrow. Otherwise, the bank will not fund the loan, and they also won't fund the loan if they don't like the way that the evidence of insurance is shown to them. It has to have their name on it, and they want to know that the buyer is covered. So those are two things that you want to start working on day one.
You
You
know,
want to get that
I think
TIC agreement and all of that approved by the lender, and that insurance approved by the lender on day one. Don't wait until week 2, because if you run into a speed bump or a red flag, now you've just turned into something. Now your escrow is turning into a 2-month long escrow.
that fee, that charge could be incorporated into the TIC agreement, maybe as part of a transfer in fee.
Well, it's not. It's like most of the ones that I do, there is no charge. The escrow officer does it, or I do it. Uh, it doesn't come up every single time. It's pretty rare that you're going to have to hire an attorney. It would probably be a few $100s. $200 or something. So I would say that should be a buyer's fee, but it's negotiable.
Okay. Well, let's move on to the difference between red flags and speed bumps, right? Because some things come down the pike that if you're a really seasoned agent, you're like, oh gosh, this is really no big deal. But buyers don't necessarily know that. So let's put our buyer agent hats on and try, what are some ways that you can, I think, within the scope of your professional work, right? Not overstepping. You're not, we're not attorneys. Um, what are some ways that you help contextualize some of these things for buyers as you're educating them? Because some of this can feel really overwhelming, especially for maybe a first-time home buyer who might be just kind of nervous to begin with. And here's the hundreds of pages of documents. And so, how do you kind of, in a nutshell, help them get through this in a way that they can kind of make sense of it and feel good about the transaction?
I would tell them don't put it in AI. Actually read the package, because they put in AI and then they send me like 15 pages of questions. And I'm like, did you actually read that? Because I have notes too, and mine are similar but very different. And the listing agent's going to go bananas if I just send this word for word, because it's not even you telling me, it's AI asking the questions. Um, but active litigation, I mean, I think the first thing I do before I even show the property is I call listing agents on most recent sales and buyer's agents on most recent sales to find out who financed it, how much did they put down, if you don't know already. And if there's active litigation or an SB 800 claim, and I'm representing the buyer, I tell them, look, it could be a couple of years, and even then, you're going to get an award, and then you have to do all the work, right? And so, and if it's a newly built building that's like 2 or 3 or 4 years old, I prepare them that, hey, listen, year 6 or 7, the Miller Law Firm or some other firm is going to send a letter to the HOA to do, which is not necessarily a bad thing. We have SB 800 in California for a reason, because it's very hard to build a perfect building, right? Think about the amount of people involved and trades, and the east side of the building does this, the west side of the building does that. So I don't necessarily think that construction defect is a bad thing. I think in some ways it can be a very good thing, because if the HOA does not pursue their right to investigate any defects before year 10, they lose the right, and then they are stuck dealing with it themselves. So I don't make it like it's a good thing, but it's just a thing, right? This is California and this is the way it works. And so if it's a newly built building, I'll tell them, don't be surprised if, in midway, this is going to come up. And it does make it challenging to sell during that period, not impossible, but more challenging because financing options will be limited. Um, and so I don't know. I just make sure my clients understand that, especially in newly built condominiums. If there's active litigation in a smaller HOA, I usually tell them, do you really want to get involved? Because the thing about everyone loves the charming San Francisco 2-unit building HOA thing. And I just tell my clients, look, first of all, you're going to have a second job. And two, if you don't like that person, there's nobody to go to. I really like 3 to 4 unit buildings more. Over four, they have to have a manager, right? Over 6 or 8, they really should be incorporated, right? There's no law for that, but you have to understand you're going to be more involved in the process. Just like, but if you owned a house, you'd be more involved too, or you should be. You should be actually maintaining your property. But I just make sure my clients are, I always say, I'm going to tell you the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? And I'm going to tell you stories of past clients over the years because I want to still have a relationship with you and I want you to be happy. I mean, there's no perfect place, but litigation in a small building, I tell people don't do it. Just there's always going to be another place. Bigger buildings, I'm not afraid of it if they have a good management company and they're on top of it.
Michelle, you mentioned that I was thinking about this when this question started about we find ourselves reminding mostly not board members, but mostly homeowners that if they had a single family house, out of the city, they would be paying for their roof, their water, their security. They forget that they are not in a hotel where they call the front desk and we
Yeah.
need to make everything right. They just have someone organizing it for them. And it's even though we have a 150 unit in South City, and they don't think about it one day until the one meeting where we're going to try to, charge for something. And you have to remind them that they are just 5 people owning a house, and they still have the same duties and costs
Well,
to
in
do that.
small old buildings like our Victorian, I live in an old Victorian that was built in the late 1800s, and it's a single family. I repaint my front stairs every 2 years
Hmm.
because it's so expensive to rebuild them because I'm on the historic registry. It would cost a fortune.
Yeah.
So you can't just, that goes back to Anthony's thing with the low dues. It's like if it's really low dues, they're not taking care of the property. So I just say it once to my client, and if they're still in love with it, they just have to understand. But it's to me, not having a professional manager or at least a professional financial bookkeeper, even on a small 2 to 4 unit, like they should still have someone that helps them with certain things, I
Yeah.
think.
Michelle, are you putting this advice in an email to your clients? I mean, I know it's so easy to say this when you're touring or when you're just kind of on the phone talking about an opportunity, but are you advising and saying some of this to just to get it memorialized in an email?
Typically no, because I feel like what ends up happening is we're either, well, it just depends on the situation. But like, when you're first learning, I usually don't, I would say, and I'm kind of an alarmist and kind of document everything, but I haven't been. Maybe I should be. But because I also feel like I want to give them real life practical advice. I don't want it to be construed as me giving them any kind of legal advice or something. So I haven't.
How can I
Mhm.
ask you how much of the stuff in the packet is getting to the buyers?
Which,
Are they getting every single thing that you guys get from
oh yeah,
HomeWise?
we touch it, they get it.
And
That's
they are
basically it.
reading the reserve study and they're reading the minutes and the budgets and
They
they're
They
must not read
should.
anything.
yeah,
They
We don't
don't,
know what
which
they're
is
reading.
why, I mean, I try to read as many of those things as I can, even as the buyer's agent. I mean, it's impossible to read 5,000
yeah,
pages, but I think I usually ask my clients too, what's important to you? Like
yeah,
if it's a small building, is sound transference important to you or pets important to you? Um, but it's so much
yeah.
to go over. But yes, anything I get from the HOA, it goes in there.
You give it all to them, yeah.
Yeah, and we're updating it. I've had some listings for 2 years in some of these high rises. We're constantly updating our HOA documents and asking. And I make sure my clients know you have a duty to disclose till the end.
Right. Yeah.
Michelle, you bring up a really important point, which I think, you said, well, clients, what's important to you? And what do you think about making sure that they get their questions in writing over to the seller
Oh yeah, no, if they
about
have
some of these
questions
things?
about the HOA and we're just kind of talking on a tour, I say put them in an email and we are going to forward them to the listing agent and the seller will respond. And even if I'm touring one of my listings and they start asking a lot of questions that I really cannot answer, I will say, please send me an email and I will forward it on to the seller and they will respond. And then what I typically do, if I have a listing and I'm getting a bunch of questions from different buyers agents, is I take all those questions and I group them together and I put them on a Word document and I just say questions from prospective buyers. And then we put it in the disclosures IO package because there might be something that's said in there that's not in the disclosures, that's not in the San Francisco seller disclosure, right? Which asks a lot of the condo questions that might be material to someone. It's like, what's the definition of material? So I try to be super transparent when I'm the listing agent, to do that. If there's a couple buyers that are asking me, are my seller questions.
Great. Okay, lots to talk about today. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so we just talked about some buyer agent strategies. We've been weaving in listing agent strategies. Next slide. So we've talked about pretty much all of this. I think this is a nice review of things that we've talked about. So, um, get in there early, review everything, um, build that relationship with both the HOA and also, property management. And I really like the last one. Know the rules on signage, lock boxes, and open houses. We installed a lock box recently on a building kind of around the corner, and we received let's just say, a very thorough email with pictures of of our lock box and very strongly worded language.
Not from us. Not from our management
It,
company.
it was not it was not you, but I mean, it was really impressive. No, it was just from the HOA.
Yeah.
But I think the response didn't really match the
The
inflection.
attempt.
But yeah, so I think that's good advice to just do that research early.
I would say on this, kind of what I in the very opening thing is you'd be surprised how many owners join the meetings when they know that they're going to start selling their building and start pushing for spending some money, which is fine. We're happy to see that. Um, if I were to do it from the beginning, as soon as the owner knows that they're thinking about selling, and I don't know how far that is lead time for you all, get the packet, like I said, from the very beginning, and have the owner introduce the listing agent to the association almost a month before you are going to ask for anything. And just say, we're thinking about putting it on the market. I'm going to get a disclosure packet. Um, and I'll let you know if we need anything. And that's it. The first question should not be, here's the 5 questions. Can you tell me what these are? The second part of that is if you send us questions and you've already went through all the disclosures and answered the question, like if it's not in the disclosure because you checked and you cannot find it, we are more apt to answering those questions as opposed to questions that we know are in the disclosures because we'll just say, oh, it's in the CC&Rs, oh, it's in the thing. So if you do your research and then come to us with things that truly aren't there, we will respond much quicker to those items because it's our fault they're not in there.
Great advice. And I think that goes between agent to agent as well, right? We get that all the time. Um, okay, so I know it has become increasingly popular for listing agents to create an FAQ that they can leave on the kitchen counter that has commonly asked questions and some answers. I generally see a waiver at the top of those that says, this does not supplant the buyer's reading of the HOA documents. But wondering if anybody has comments about that, about this takeaway that buyers can have when they visit the property and also in the disclosure package.
I like what Michelle just mentioned, putting something in the disclosures like a one sheet where you kind of spell out some of the things that might be an issue in the particular HOA or documents or just history of the building or whatever, just to kind of make it easier because it's overwhelming. I mean, we're talking about something like 500 or 1,000 pages. Are people really going to read all of that? So I've done it in some cases where there was a specific thing that I really wanted to explain to a buyer about one of my listings, but I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, I don't actually put like the things that I put in there are just like if a buyer says, ask me like 4 or 5 questions to the seller, I just cut and paste those so everyone can see the questions. Meaning like that if buyer one is asking me like, you know, uh, things like when were the windows last washed or whatever questions, I just put all of those in there. I've stopped doing FAQs to be honest, because I feel like there's it just provides an environment, even with a waiver, where the buyers don't read. And so I've stopped doing it. Like if the buyer's agent calls me and asks me, I'll get on the phone with them and say, okay, let's look at the CCNRs together. And okay, where's the right to lease section? Okay, let's look at the house rules to make sure it matches. But I've stopped doing that because I feel like it's creating a ton of liability for me. And honestly, it's not my job as a listing agent to fulfill the buyer's need to understand something. They should be reading this document. Like, I tell like my buyers, you are buying a house, not a book. A book has a front cover, a back cover, a spine, some pages with some photos and some type. It's a living, breathing thing. There are so many things like you have to read all the documents. And if they don't, that's okay. But I've told them they should. So I feel like the FAQs are kind of dangerous. So I've just stopped doing them personally.
Yeah, I've never done one actually, but what I did create a sheet for a particular listing that had some weird thing going on. I just wanted
Yeah.
to try to help explain that item.
Great. Any other thoughts on this one?
What the dues cover that comes, oh, that's almost like an instant question.
But
So,
that's on the condo financial disclosure statement now, which is awesome, right?
oh,
Because the
that's good.
property manager is actually filling it out. Like,
Mhm.
I'm glad that the Forms Committee has done that. It's changed so much over the past, I would say, 5, 6 years, where it asks, what do the HOAs cover? And then we're putting the onus on the management company to fill out what is actually covered in the budget. And then I read it and I will ask my client, is this your understanding? But a lot of that stuff is right there, right? Like, and as far as like the pet policy and all that stuff, it takes 2 minutes for the buyer's agent to just look at the CCNRs and go to the index. If you go to an index, it lists every single thing. It has right to lease, animals, signage, all that stuff is in there. So the index is great. That's the first place they should go.
The tough
And
thing on
it's,
older CCNRs, like you said earlier, Michelle, is there's a lot of laws that have come up that are way further ahead
Yeah.
than the CCNRs. We won't tell you of that. The owners won't tell you of that. I
Yeah.
don't know the best way for you all to keep up on that, but there's definitely, conflict between that too.
in
Well,
the,
you can always have your client, if there's an old building like that, whenever I sell a TIC, I always really encourage my buyer to have a consultation with a tenant, a TIC attorney, whether it's McGinnis, at Andy's office or Lisa Paul is great. There's several attorneys that can do it. And so a lot of that stuff, if it's an old CCNRs, I would probably advise my buyer even before they write an offer in a competitive market. Hey, let's just get you a consultation. You can have one of the top, condo attorneys just look at it and tell you the things that are missing in here. Something may come up in lending, something may not. Like a lot of the really old CCNRs from like the 80s and the 70s didn't have arbitration clauses in them. And
Yeah.
sometimes lenders would flag those. So I'm not afraid to tell my client to seek legal advice, if they have questions about that stuff. And even if it's pre-offer, it's okay, right? If they really like the place, they want to play to win and be as educated as possible. So we'll close.
Great.
and I always set up pro bookkeeping, even if it's a 2 unit TIC, so that there's somebody tracking all of that where that money's going and what it's for. And you can, the company that I use is Homeworks, and they'll provide a document for the buyer showing where all the money's going.
They'll do the budget homework. We have some properties that homework does the accounting. We do the management. We also do, everything. But they'll do the budgeting too, which is really nice for the
Mhm.
smaller properties, which helped.
And it just shows, it makes it a little more, even a 2 unit. I never do the
Yeah.
like, oh, just do it yourself.
And you can say professionally managed.
Mhm.
We have small buildings that they just wanted the professionally managed side of it to be on the listing, which and it helps to have HomeWise stuff organized. The last thing I
especially,
would say is,
especially in a TIC, because you're collecting property tax from each owner
yeah,
every month. And
yeah,
that's really like, oof.
you want to push the liability as much on somebody
Mhm.
else. And maybe it's the people that do it professionally, not the volunteers, is kind of how we
Right. Who wants
see
to
it.
like have, I say to them, do you want to go knock on your neighbor's door and say, where's your
Right.
property tax? Why would you want to do
So,
that?
Great,
And
great
people are
point.
busy. Our clients
Mhm.
are super busy. It's like having
Right.
another job,
Good
hire a
job.
professional to do it.
It's not that expensive. It's only a couple $100 a month. It's nothing.
Good points. Okay, we're low on time. Let's talk a little bit about financing. Next slide, please. I think this next slide is a great one to screenshot. There's a lot to talk about here, but maybe we could take 1 minute if somebody could comment on one of these boxes that you think is especially important. I know we've talked about litigation. We haven't really talked about owner occupancy ratio or non-warrantable,
I did
but
one note that I had that we were looking at this the other day is HOA has no obligation to follow Fannie and Freddie requirements. And that I'm sure you guys all know that, but we see that kind of often, like, oh, it requires this and this. That has nothing to do with us if the board doesn't want to do it.
okay.
I think that high delinquency rates are kind of a red flag, right? If I'm representing a buyer, because one, the people in the building are not paying, and two, the HOA is not really
Enforcement.
enforcing it to the level that they should. Um, you know, active litigation, I talked a little bit about that. I mean, if it's small, I would tell them there'll be something else. If it's big, then we just go through the process and investigate it. They just have to be comfortable. Um, and the owner occupancy ratio, I mean, the tricky part about like a lot of the high-rise condominiums is a lot of them are second and third homes. I'm okay with that. But if there's a ton of rentals in the building, then they have to realize like if people are renting, not that there's anything wrong with renting because a lot of people rent, but when people own, there's a different typically pride of ownership. So they just may want to think about that.
And the involvement of, the six statements, you are volunteering to help the building, and the tenants have no obligation to assist in that. Grabbing packages, meeting vendors, um, warning about garbage, overflowing, stuff like that they see today. The tenants aren't, for the most part, the tenants aren't involved in that. We do see it in the higher rent, smaller size buildings, but they have no obligation to help.
And on TICs, you have 7 different lenders, and each one of them has their own set of rules. But you want to look into LSX. Some of them will not lend on buildings with some LSX still on title, and of course they all have their owner occupancy and all that. So, but you have 7 of them to run it by, and I would just blind CC all of them and tell them what you've got. If there's one of those issues.
Okay, let's cover one more slide and then we have some questions that we can kind of zoom through. So what we can't touch. So knowing your lane as an agent is really important. I know we've touched on some of that today. I think Michelle said, we're not attorneys. We're not attorneys. So Jen, if you can go to the next slide. Okay, here we are. So here are some topics that I think can get a little bit murky. Interpreting CCNRs or bylaws. Does this rule apply to me? So like in that case, Michelle, that seems like a really good opportunity for a seller to put a question in writing and to send that over to the HOA.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, they can always ask the HOA, and um, my team also has a legal plan for all of our buyers and sellers where they can get 30 minutes of free time with a real estate attorney. It takes a couple days to get the consult, but they can ask one of those real estate attorneys also, you know. It's always good to ask. It shouldn't be the agents deciding. That's not our job. We don't have law degrees. And even if you do have a law degree and you're selling real estate, you should stay in that lane too. You just have higher knowledge.
And Anthony, when people have questions about TIC to condo conversion, I know you're the king of TICs, but what is the best way for those buyers to get those types of questions answered?
Well, I mean, you can start if I'm the listing agent, you could ask me. I could give you my opinion, but Rosemary McGinnis at Andy Serkin's law firm that's who I would go to with that question. And that's become so complex. There are these little teeny fine points, like in a 2 unit TIC, they don't seem to be policing you know, a buyout of an elderly or disabled person doesn't impact conversion, but in a 3 to 4 unit, it does. So it's definitely it definitely gets to the point where you don't want to be promoting this can condo convert if you really don't know what you're talking about. But most clean 2 unit TICs, I've sold a couple of them. And yeah, actually, an agent just emailed me yesterday and said, I sold two on Fillmore and in the marina. And he said, should we be, getting started on this? And I said, yes, contact Rosemary McGinnis. And these are the steps that you need to do. But yeah, you just direct them to, one of the TIC attorneys that does condo conversion. But it's mostly just 2 units these days. I guess the condo lottery might come back soon, and that'll be for 3 and 4 unit TICs only. But it's pretty limited.
The question that we took on a lot of single unit condos coming into COVID when people wanted to hold but rent, and they're starting to come back, starting to list their units. And there's a lot of questions about if there's a tenant, can they get the tenant out to sell the unit vacant?
Yeah, that has changed, and that's where you want to get to a
Yeah. And
landlord.
so that's on our management side, obviously. As long as my understanding, not legal advice, but what we understand of it as a broker is that as long as we gave them the correct addendum when they moved in and the law was disclosed, and it's an individual condo, I don't know about TICs, then they do have a right with 60 days to, if they're going to take it off the rental market, to organize that move out. Obviously it's per unit and per yourself, and I'm not a lawyer, but that's been coming up a lot in the HOAs lately.
I would definitely speak with a landlord attorney on that one because there are all kinds of new rules about getting people out of units, whether it's a condo or under rent control or not under rent control. There's some sort of state law about, after
Oh,
COVID.
non-rent control one. Sorry, I should clarify that.
Mhm.
So
But
we have
that's
a
something.
couple of questions from the Q&A here. Where could somebody find past special assessment history, right? Is there a duty that an HOA has to provide, like look back for a certain amount of time,
It would
provide
be
that?
all the annual packets would have it. If there was an emergency one, it would be the best way, the easiest way would be to find it on the homeowner's ledger, which I don't know if you guys are looking at those, but everything that the homeowner paid to management would be the quickest way to find that from the homeowner without contacting us.
I just had this question on one of my listings. They wanted to know during the owner's ownership, which was a little over 12 years, had there been any special assessments? So I just had the seller answer it. They went through
Yeah.
and they gave the amounts during their, and that's it.
Hmm. Okay. Let's see here.
Management only has that as long as we've managed. We have tough, murky records if there was a previous management company from in any situation.
There's a question here. What is your strategy for dealing with a professional HOA management company who consistently provides incomplete or old documents?
I have my client call them because they work for the owners, not for us. I kind of step out of it and say, I explain the importance of it and why it's so important for their own personal liability. And I usually stop bugging the HOA and just have the homeowner deal with it. And if it takes time, then it takes time. There's nothing we can do. So we shouldn't be inserting ourselves in that process, in my opinion. I apologize, everyone. I have another call, so I'm going to say goodbye. But thank you for the opportunity. And I'm always available if anyone wants to text me or has a question. If I can help, I'm happy to collaborate and share. Hope everyone has a great day.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Michelle.
I would say on that, obviously, not obviously, but often we've only provided what we have also. Like, I can only speak to our company, but we've given the best of everything that we have, and it is often incomplete. Whether it's we took over management lately, where there was a no board and or no HOA management company, and we were the first ones to do it. Often this stuff's just not there, which we will mention. And then we have to just rebuild it with past boards and stuff if we can figure the information out.
Great. So one other question. There's a question here about some new technology called Quibi that helps address records of truth for HOA docs, meeting minutes, and such. Has anybody heard of that?
I have not.
Okay.
No. So maybe they're dropping everything in and then asking for it to
Perhaps.
like chatting.
Perhaps. Well, that's pretty much our time. If we could maybe just wrap it up with one takeaway, that maybe you'd like to offer now that we've kind of gone through all the material, just one thing for people to keep in mind as they go forth with their buyers and sellers.
Obviously on the rental side and the HOA side, reach out to us for anything. We have a consulting plan now. So what we do is we can do accounting for people and then add consulting hours. So it's everything up until needing legal advice. And so we do a lot of that for the smaller communities that still need support. Because there's a lot of, as these management companies grow, you see the same HOAs kind of go down and lose their contract. And so we're trying to build something for them to have support when their dues are only like, $250 a month. The other thing I want to say is tell your owners to get involved with the board. They're not buying into a job, they're buying into a volunteer community. And if they don't like it, join the board, come to the meetings. Mostly it's people that aren't at the meetings are the ones that are the most irritated. Just tell them to sign up. It's free.
Great.
Yeah, and just like Michelle said, feel free to contact me if you need help with setting up a TIC, or if you're going into a TIC and there's something weird going on and you have a question, you want a quick answer, you can always text me. I'm happy to help people because I sell so many of these, I want people to feel comfortable buying them and, don't be afraid of a TIC association. They're a little bit weird, they're very, usually pretty small and, not professionally managed, but I try to set every single one of them up with at least pro bookkeeping. And I like what Michelle was saying, as you get up above 4 units, it's probably time to go to professional management. And I'm going to start trying to do that as well. I haven't been doing that, but that's a good idea. Shift them over to pro management because you get up into 6 units, just too much, for the
And there's usually one person doing all of it. And if you lose them, every call we get is from one person that's just over it for the past 3 years. And I hear you. And I always tell them, I was like, you're volunteer, we get paid. There's a value to this. We get paid to do it and you're doing it for free. You can't keep doing that.
And it's built into the budget of those bigger TICs, but people just don't do it. They don't go pro. And I've had bad experiences this is years and years and years ago when, everybody was on one loan in a TIC. That went away in around 2006, 2007. But, back in those days, you had to meet with the buyer or there was an opportunity for the rest of the group to meet with the buyer. And this woman was trying to do her job. She was the only one who showed up. And she sent an email out to the group saying, you should at least talk to this person because they're a liability to your investment or she used some word like that. And this was a buyer coming in with all cash. And they were going to be exposed to this giant building loan. And the Greek dad in Boston who was buying the $500,000 one-bedroom TIC for his son saw that email because she CC'd the buyer's agent, and the buyer's agent sent it to the dad. The dad got offended and backed the buyer out of the deal. And you can't really blame this woman. She was like an art teacher in a little $300,000 studio, probably put the least amount of money down, but she thought she was doing her job, but that's just an analogy of just homeowners trying to run a big building and deal with things. They're not always the best people to do that when you get up.
Okay, well, thank you everybody for joining us today. Thanks so much to our panelists, Nicholas, Anthony, and Michelle. So glad to have everybody here, and feel free to leave some feedback for us at SFAR if you enjoyed today. And stay tuned for our next programming. You can check that out online as well. Okay, thanks so much. Have a
Great.
good
Thanks,
day,
guys.
everybody.